If there be songs, let them be good Vajra songs. If there be dances, let them be good Vajra dances.
Cannabis truly is a pharmacy and a flower.
Survival comes with cooperation.
Pleasure is healing.
You're being a warrior of the weird.
I'm Lex Pelger, Director of Education at CV Sciences, and this is the Lex Files. The history of drugs and religion is important, and often fraught with controversy. In the history of Hinduism, tens of thousands of pages have been written speculating about the identity of the legendary soma, a psychoactive substance that was also a god. But Hinduism and Buddhism have a long and complicated history, as you'll hear from today's guest, Mike Crowley. And in Buddhism, if you look at the art, or read the ancient text, or even participate in modern ceremonies, you'll see constant references to Amrita, which might be called the soma of Buddhism. And while many scholars have worked on the identification of soma, Mike Crowley's book breaks new ground on identifying the important and mysterious Amrita of Tibetan Buddhism. Drawn his knowledge of ancient languages, most especially Sanskrit, a gigantic language with a keen delight in wordplay, he believes that the secret to Amrita is laying right there, hidden in plain sight. And this isn't just esoteric contemplations on past mysteries. As you'll hear from Mike, the religious experiences of Buddhism still resonate today, and the ancient Tantric practices are still changing lives around the world. The name of the book is Secret Drugs of Buddhism, Psychedelic Sacraments and the Origins of the Vajrayana. And the author is someone I feel lucky that we get to hear from. He's not just a scholar who knows the languages and knows the text. He's a fully ordained Lama in the Tibetan Kagyud school. And since 1989, he's in charge of his teachers' 100-plus students in North America. So he speaks from inside the tradition, but he's still a curious lad from Wales and a seeker whose lived experiences help to illuminate his work and spice up his talks. So come with me to snowy Northern California and dive deep into our shared psychedelic history. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to have Mike Crowley here on the show, the author of Secret Drugs of Buddhism. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I'm sitting here in the middle of a snow-covered landscape at a remote farm in a very distant part of California in the middle of a vast forest. It's just a pleasure to speak to anybody at the moment, and I'm likely to go on for hours if you let me.
Yeah, because there's a lot. It's a dense book. I mean, it's well footnoted, well researched. And so I actually wanted to start with a more basic question. And that's because you know so much about the history of religions as well, is clear from the book. Can you tell us what's different about Tibetan Buddhism than some of the other traditions of Buddhism?
Well, in order to do that, I'd really have to describe the background to basically the state of Indian religions. I'll do a quick thumbnail sketch of what preceded Buddhism. And the predominant religious practice of, say, 2000 to 1000 BC was Vedic Hinduism, at least. That's what we call it nowadays. And it, at its greatest extent, it was only in northern India anyway. But it was rather like this. It was something done by a special caste of people. We don't have that kind of thing these days. These days, we assume that people have a religion. It wasn't like that. You paid these guys to do religion for you. And it was basically rituals and appeals to a set of gods which were very, very similar to the Roman, Greek, and Norse and Celtic gods. In fact, you can trace linguistic parallels between, say, Varuna in India to Auranos and Uranos in Greek and Roman pantheons. Now, this went into decline um, around 1000 BC, and we hear more about the Shramana movement, a movement of ascetics and meditators and people who went into the forest to meditate, to do various yogic and breathing practices and so on. Some were entirely atheist, like the Arjivakas, and some were very logical. And I won't go into the mythology of the origin of the Buddha. And well, many people take the story of his being born as a prince um, and the surroundings of that as literal, but it's also claimed by other religious leaders of the Shravaka movement, like Vardhaman, who's always referred to as the great soul, Mahavira, a great hero. And he has actually like an almost identical biography. So I think we can just discard that. Anyway, that's not the important thing about these movements, like the um, Vedanta movement, which claimed to be the end of the Vedas. Now, this could mean the final statement of the Vedas, or it could mean a replacement for the Vedas. We're not sure. But around the same time, about 500 BC, we see the Jains, the Jain religion founded by Vardhaman, who claimed to be a Tirthankara, ferryman, someone who ferries you across a river. And at the same time, there was the Buddha, born as Gautama Siddhartha, and given the title of the Buddha. In this case, it means the awakened one, the one who woke up. So his initial teachings are that the world is unsatisfactory. None of us feel satisfied with the world. The reason for it being unsatisfactory is that when things are going well, we don't want them to stop, but they will. That's the nature of things. Well, when they're going badly, we want that to be over with as fast as possible, but it'll take its time. That's just the nature of things. And so it's the desire for things to be otherwise is what makes it unsatisfactory. And the Buddha said, there is a way to deal with that. And that way is, and then he described the Noble Eightfold Path, which he spent the rest of his life explaining. So early Buddhism is just that, just the Buddha's teachings and a few poems and songs of the early monks and nuns, and commentaries, and eventually a body of work called the Abhidharma, which goes into things like psychology and cosmology and other things which are not necessary at all, but for the practice of Buddhism. But they do seem to have come up with some interesting ideas. So this early form of Buddhism taught that the idea of a person, of a self, is illusory. The Buddha described it as like a fire magician. Like this was a thing. It didn't happen in Burning Man. It was a thing back then that somebody who would dance and play with fire could whirl a brand around on the end of a string, like a flaming poi at Burning Man, and create a circle. You could see a circle. It was a real circle, but when you actually got to its reality, it was a single burning brand on the end of a string. Now he said that our perception of a self is rather like that, analogous to that there are elements which exist for a certain period of time, and they're combined in such a way that they give the impression of persisting personality. But if you examine it closely, you'll see that and he labeled 5 elements, 5 aspects of the personality, none of which are permanent. So that was early Buddhism. Then around 100 BC to 100 AD, there was a movement which at first wasn't different from early Buddhism, but it came to define itself as the great vehicle, the Mahayana. And this was, early Buddhism was only practiced by monks and nuns. If you were lay Buddhist, your practice would consist of providing alms and medicine and food and clothing to the monks and nuns. This new movement, the Mahayana, said that anyone can do Buddhism, householders can do Buddhism. And they added a few things to it, like a kind of open-hearted shifting of attention away from the self to benefit others. And they also pointed out that the analysis of the self was valid, but it should not be confined to people. Like there's nothing that has any innate quality that makes it what we call it. Like looking out of my window, I can see my shed, and it's made of planks of wood, and the planks of wood have a grain and show finer details the more closely you look at it. So there's nothing about my shed which makes it a shed. If I take one of the walls away, it'll still be a shed. If I take the door off, it'll still be a shed. It's like the ancient Greek paradox of the sorites, the heap. There's a heap of sand, and you can take grains of sand off it, one grain at a time. And at what point does it stop being a heap?
Mm-hmm.
So the Buddha pointed out the insubstantiality of things, because they're all made up of elements which come and go, but the thing still remains. The Mahayanists created sutras which they put into the mouth of the Buddha. They claimed that it was the Buddha saying them. Unfortunately, they kind of give the game away by adding lots of colorful details to the surroundings and the people who attended the talk and all these things. It was a real giveaway. But they did extend the philosophy to they called the earlier selflessness of the person, Pudgala Atman, the no self of the person. These new philosophers spoke of the Dharmanatman, which is the no selfness of things, and they began to introduce the notion of no thingness. The term they used was shunyata, which literally translates to emptiness. But it should be noted that the word shunya, which literally means empty, also meant an empty space in a series of numbers. So you might take the number 108. They would write that as 1 space 8. And so this space later became a 0, by the way. It became first of all a dot and then a circle. We call it 0, which believe it or not, is actually linguistically related to shunya. And cipher, by the way. Yeah, they both come from Sanskrit via Persian and Arabic. Zifr in Arabic. Anyway, I digress. The Vedanta philosophers spoke of non-duality, the non-dual nature of reality, that everything is just one continuous stuff, if you like. It is undifferentiated stuff. It is only us with our dualistic minds that turn it into things with concepts and words and categories and labels. So this much, the Advaita philosophers, that's Advaita, it just means non-dual, philosophers of Vedanta, they have a lot in common with Mahayana Buddhism. With one exception, they tend to call it ekata, which means oneness. It's the oneness of everything. But the Buddhists had a long history of debate, and they knew that if you called it oneness, you laid yourself open to a lot of criticism, and your opponent might say, well, one what? What is it? What is this one that we speak? Doesn't one imply two, etc.? And lots of arguments like that. But the Buddhists would never say it's one. In fact, it does in much later philosophies like Dzogchen in Tibet. But they said it's not two. It's Advaita. It's not, dva, two, ta, ness. So it's not two-ness, Advaita. And as a kind of symbol for this, they spoke of not oneness, but noneness, zero-ness, shunyata. So, okay, that is that's been like a 10-minute course on what are called Hinayana and Mahayana philosophies. So there was a further development. In the 5th century, something happened to all kinds of Indian religions, including like Shiva worship and Vishnu worship and Jainism and Buddhism. They all developed tantras. Now, a tantra is a kind of scripture. The earlier scriptures were called sutras, which means thread, and tantra means weave. It's a very wry joke that the word tantra refers to weaving with a warp and a weft. Whereas the sutras would start, like the original early Buddhist sutras would start, this is what I once heard. The Buddha was in a name of a place, a location, in the company of, and then there's a bunch of monks and disciples of his. And so asked him this question. And this was his response. And that's how almost all of the suttas. The sutta is the early Buddhist discourses of the Buddha. The Mahayanists called theirs sutras, which is a Sanskrit word, not a Pali word. So Pali, by the way, is another word for Magadhi, which was the actual dialect of the Buddha. So the sutras would start. This is what I once heard. The Buddha was sometimes in a celestial location, sometimes just an earthly mythical location, somewhere like the Vulture Peak at Greenhakuta. I've been there. It's very small. It's very cute and compact. But they go on to describe like hundreds of people and great beings and gods and nagas and all kinds of celestial and alien beings who are clustered around this place. It'll take about a dozen people tops, but anyway, that's how the sutras start, and they still have the same. So and so asked this question, and there's a complete disjoint between those sutras and these new texts called the tantras. They were basically the same format, but a parody of the format. They opened with, this is what I once heard. The Buddha so and so, and they name him, and it's often a philosophical or celestial or non-human Buddha. And he was dwelling in the vagina of the goddess so and so. And the Buddha Kapala, which means Buddha's skull, was dwelling in the vagina of Chitrasena, bright spear goddess. And one of the bodhisattvas asks a question. Oh, yes, I forgot a bit of an important bit too. He's like, he has an orgasm and his head falls off. And then I think it's a Bodhisattva Vajrapani who asks, how do we educate really stupid people? And the Buddha's disembodied head, his mouth opens and out rolls a scroll. And the scroll is such that it makes underground nagas, the snake spirits, sweat. And I do not have this initiation, so I can talk about it. Otherwise, I'd be bound to secrecy, as a lot of these things were secret. And from what I have learned in initiations is that not only is there an entire system of code called Sandhya Bhasha in Sanskrit. It means intentional language or twilight language. Opinions differ. And it's a system of word substitution, which has to be employed in order to understand the Tantra. On top of that, in the final stages after the formal ritual initiation, you're told the code and, very importantly, the order of the pages, because most of these very secret tantras are deliberately shuffled, as well as being in code. So I maintain in my book the paramount importance of a psychedelic substance known as Amrita. This is given to initiates at the standard Vajrayana. This is called the Vajrayana, by the way, which means the thunderbolt vehicle. It's basically 4 separate initiations or empowerments. And in the first one, you're given a sip of water and told that if you betray the secrets, it will turn into glowing iron within you. So that copies an ancient Vedic tradition where the Brahmin priests would take a sip of water before doing anything, and they still do. But anyway, it begins with the sip of water. And then the second initiation, you're given Amrita, known as Dutsi in Tibetan. Dutsi means demon juice. I give a possible explanation for this in my book, and it's a mythological explanation. There is a particular story, which I won't go into now. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to read the book. So this substance is given to the initiates. And if you read certain ancient texts and a few more obscure modern texts where 20th century lamas give the game away a bit. They talk about the successive effects of the Amrita. And I should say that Amrita was the first time we see the name Amrita. It is a synonym for the Vedic psychoactive substance called soma, which its name soma means that which has been pressed out, from the root su, to press. But I think it's easier to translate that as just juice. The juice of something is what's being pressed out. So it was either called soma or shukla or shudra, but mainly it was called Amrita, and especially in the later myths, the Hindu myths about the creation of Amrita and why Shiva has a blue throat and so on. Shiva's blue throat I see as a pun on blue stalk. It's either Nilakanta or Nilakanda. They're very close, right? It's a very obvious pun in Sanskrit. I've actually pointed it out to Indians who know a little Sanskrit, and they're astonished as to why they'd never seen that before. And I think that's an example of something hiding in plain sight. So, around the 5th century, we see these tantras turning up, and also at the same time, the appearance of Buddhist versions of Shiva. And as Shiva could easily have been this psychedelic mushroom, Psilocybe cubensis, which the stem turns blue when you pick it. And so blue stalk or blue stem is very, very much like blue throat in Sanskrit, the sound of it. And we hear the story of how Shiva got his blue throat in the myth of the churning of the ocean, which is told about 7 times, various places. The Mahabharata, the Shiva Purana. There's several different places. They all tell it slightly differently, and they usually include the story of a poisonous byproduct, a toxic substance called hala hala, and Shiva volunteers to eat it to stop the world being poisoned. And some sources say that Vishnu, the god Vishnu, put his hand at the bottom of Shiva's neck to stop him swallowing it, or he'd kill himself. And meanwhile, his wife Parvati slapped her hand over his mouth to stop him vomiting it up, or he'd poison the world. So it stayed in his throat, and it turned his throat blue, as poisons do, apparently. I'm not really a toxicologist, but I've never heard of this blue staining before. Anyway, Shiva was imported into Buddhism in various ways, under various guises. The most popular one is Avalokiteshvara. A local deity was, perhaps several local deities. Lokeshvara means the lord of the place, the location. And certain authorities on iconography say that this local deity form of Shiva was converted into Avalokiteshvara, who, if you ever see the 11-faced form, the Ekadasha Mukha Avalokiteshvara, you will see that he has a deerskin cape or shawl. He carries bow and arrows and a flask of medicine. Oh, this flask of medicine persisted all the way to Japan in the hands of Guan Yin and then Kannon, her Japanese form. But ultimately, it comes from a form of Shiva, a very early form of Shiva called Rudra. And there's a whole myth behind his bow and the arrows and the flask of medicine, which is called Jalabha, I believe. I think I got that right. In the 1890s, there was a paper published in the Royal Asiatic Society's monthly journal or quarterly journal, I think it was. Um, and it argues from purely linguistic grounds that this medicine was something to do with urine. And it was a great puzzle to these linguists. Why would he be carrying a flask of urine? Well, if you consider that this early form of Shiva was a form of Amanita muscaria, then it makes sense, as I mention in the book, that the urine of someone who has eaten this psychoactive mushroom, nothing to do with the psilocybe cubensis, by the way, it's a completely different mushroom, completely different effects and a completely different substance. But the urine of someone who's eaten this mushroom often contains more of the intoxicating substance called muscimol than there was in the original mushroom. This is because the liver performs a sophisticated chemical reaction and decarboxylates something called ebotenic acid and turns it into muscimol. So, in Siberia and perhaps a few other places like northern Afghanistan, the custom of eating this mushroom is accompanied by drinking one's own urine afterwards. Now, there are a few references to this in Hindu myth, but it's rather rarer in Buddhist stories. But it does persist as red and white deities, for instance, like Amanita muscaria is the famous white spotted red cap, and there are red deities adorned with white beads and such things. So I see the advent of the tantras as being simultaneous with a new awareness or a more widespread awareness of mushroom highs. Perhaps this was because of invasions which happened around this point, like the White Scythians, the Sakas, who knows? But something happened around the 5th century which caused an upwelling of awareness and a new form of religion. And all the religions developed these strange texts, which in Buddhism are called tantras, but in Shiva worship they can be tantras or agamas or a bunch of other things. Oh yes, a form of one of the only Shiva monasteries was called the Madhya Mayuri, which means the intoxicated peacocks. There is reason to believe, which I go into in great detail in my book, is that the peacock shared the name Nilakanta with Shiva because of his blue throat. And because of that, the peacock too became a symbol, a second-hand symbol of the mushroom. Hence, the intoxicated peacocks, they're really talking about the mushroom and not the peacock at all, and the intoxication, which it's really a bad term to translate it. It's everything from rampaging elephants to your local drunk have the word madhya attached to them. It's also common word for the henbane plant, which is deliriant. It'll make you see true hallucinations. And by true hallucination, I mean things which absolutely are not there, which have no substance at all. You're not misinterpreting something which is there. You're seeing complete phantoms. Anyway, that is something which was also used and associated with Shiva. But I can't recall now when I get off. I distract myself too much these days. So ask me another question.
Hey folks, it's sponsor time. The company is CV Sciences, the product is Plus CBD, and the discount code for 20% off is LexFiles. And remember, the top 3 reasons to use that code on pluscbdoil.com. Number 1, I would give Plus CBD to your grandmother, because I gave it to my grandmother. Number 2, I was the biggest skeptic. Then I started studying the endocannabinoid system. Number 3, I know firsthand that CV Sciences is committed to pure science and to enhancing well-being. So when you find yourself in need of CBD from true agricultural hemp, consider Plus CBD, the number 1 CBD brand in the United States. That coupon code is LexFiles, and the place to use it is pluscbdoil.com.
And you were actually just getting to what my next question was going to be about, which is you talk about the red-capped amanitas mushroom and then the psilocybensis mushroom that turns blue, and how in the book you talk about how Shiva might have initially been associated with the red-capped mushroom, but then as the knowledge of the blue became...
Actually, Shiva, by that name, does not appear in the Vedas. But Rudra does, and this is what I believe Rudra referred to. Rudra is, the name is cognate with our word ruddy, meaning reddish. It also means howling, so it'll turn you barking mad, I guess. I think Rudra was the deity of the fly agaric, the red-capped, white-spotted mushroom, as he is said to have 1,000 eyes, and these can be the white spots on the red cap. Now, that's in the Rig Veda, but that was the first of the 4 classic Vedas. Now, in the Yajur Veda, first is the Rig, then the Sama Veda, which is a rearrangement of the same verses as in the Rig Veda, but in the order in which you'd use them in ritual. Then comes the Yajur Veda, of which there are actually different versions, but in one of the versions, the white Yajur Veda, it refers to several Rudras, and it says there are thousands of Rudras scattered over the face of the earth. And the red Rudras are familiar to the girls who fetch water from the springs, whereas the blue-throated Rudras are well known to the boys who tend the cattle. Now, many people will realize that Psilocybe cubensis grows on cattle dung. And I'm not sure that Amanita muscaria would grow necessarily near wells and springs, but it certainly requires moisture for its growth. So I can see that there was a transition between the Rudra of Amanita muscaria to a new form of Rudra who was said to be so powerful that you daren't speak his name. Instead, you called him the auspicious one, which is what Shiva means. That's what they say was the origin of the name Shiva. And so Rudra and Shiva are seen as aspects of each other, but I see them as actually being like different mushrooms, that they are considered similar because they're both mushrooms, but they are distinctly different in their effects. Also, not mentioned in my book is Krishna, who is, if you read Book 10 of the Bhagavan Purana, you will see that he is described very much as a psilocybe mushroom, Psilocybe cubensis, in fact. He's covered with cow dung when he's born, and sacred syllables are written on him in cow dung dust. He's anointed with cow's urine. And when he is a tiny baby, he's placed beneath a cart, which he overturns by pushing upwards with his tiny shoots of legs. It's very much like a mushroom overturning a paving stone or something. So later, I think this is the most pertinent of his many adventures for this point here, is that he sees, when he's 8 years old, he sees people taking offerings to Indra. Now, Indra was also called Somapati, the Lord of Soma, and he was portrayed as being constantly intoxicated with the with Soma, the psychoactive drink of the fire ritual. So now I say that Soma was, at least originally, was Amanita muscaria. Now, when Krishna sees the offerings on their way to Indra, he decides to play a trick. He runs around the hill called Giri Govardhana and appears as a gigantic, resplendent being and says, "Oh, where are you going with those offerings, my man?" And he says, "Oh, I'm taking them to Indra." And he says, "Don't you think you should offer them to me, the spirit of the mountain? This is where all your sustenance, your wealth comes from, is the cows on this mountain." Giri means mountain, Go is cow, and Vardhana is abundant. So it's like cattle galore mountain. And the guy is persuaded, and he says, "All right, then you can have the gifts, the offerings." And Krishna takes them and feasts on them. Meanwhile, Indra is pissed. He's saying, "Who is this upstart?" And he's shown them how to meditate without the proper rituals. And he attempts to attack the village of Vrindavan, which he says is intoxicated with wealth. It's a funny expression, but that's a whole nother discussion of wealth deities and their association with mushrooms, especially the intoxicating ones. Anyway, that being set aside for later discussion, he says, "You've been intoxicating these people and teaching them how to achieve enlightenment without the proper rituals. I'm going to hit you with a tempest." And being a sky god and storm god, he can easily do this. So he starts like hurling like monsoon rains at the village, and the villagers come to Krishna and say, "Look, you started all this business. You better like protect us." And so he says, "All right, come to Giri Govardhana." And I should say, he is blue. He is deep blue. His whole body is blue, and he goes to the mountain of Giri Govardhana, the golden mountain, and lifts it above his head with his little finger, his pinky. And in Sanskrit, it says that he lifted it as effortlessly as a child plucking a mushroom. Well, it had to be a child, because once you were accepted as an adult, you had to accept the laws. Only a child could pluck a mushroom without invoking the law, which says that to so much as touch a mushroom is like wounding a Brahmin priest. Eating a mushroom is like killing a Brahmin priest. It's in the laws of Manu, the earliest Hindu law book. Anyway, he lifts it above his head, and it is said he thus becomes a chhatra for the people of Vrindavan. Now, chhatra means literally means an umbrella, but despite Sanskrit's huge vocabulary, it has no word for mushroom, none at all. It was commonly if you had to say mushroom in speech, you would either say parasol or umbrella, basically chatra or atapatra. And if you were writing, and like in the Bhagavan Purana, when they say, as effortlessly as a child plucks a mushroom, what do you say for mushroom? Well, it's actually uchilindra, which means a sprouting wormy thing. And it's like it was absolutely taboo to mention a mushroom. Anyway, he becomes this umbrella, which is strangely like a golden capped umbrella with a blue stem. So he became a chatra, and it's quite obvious that he was a blue staining mushroom, rather like the ones that he would find on the Cattle Galore mountain. So it's so much more evident if you actually read the Sanskrit. It's not hard Sanskrit. It's quite visible that you're being given a like a nudge and a wink by the composer of the Purana. Immediately after this, Indra says, Indra's wife, Mrs. Indra, Indrani, her name, and she says, you know what? He could be a good playmate for our son. And they go, oh, yeah, right, he could. And so you imagine that their son is they are referring to the mushroom. I don't know what else they're referring to. Because, like, you turn the page, or whatever, and you're immediately presented with the figure of Kamadhenu, otherwise known as Surabi, the wish-granting cow. And she's like gives this long like praise of Krishna, what a great boon he is to mankind. And the thing about Kamadhenu is that she not only has a cow's body and like cow's horns, but she's got a human face as a beautiful woman. She's also got breasts as well as her udder. And most peculiar of all is that in addition to her normal cow's tail, she has a peacock's tail too. So this is a whole like mess of various mythic symbols and so on. And of course, as you would expect, if you were to milk Kamadhenu, which is like wish, his name means wish milk, her name, and it's really not milk at all. Because if you were to, take a stool and sit down and milk the udder of Kamadhenu, you'd find that what came out was Amrita, the sacred intoxicant and sacrament of Vajrayana Buddhism. So the mystery as to what Amrita originally was, and I think I answer it in my book.
It's one of the most fascinating parts is you making this connection from soma to the Amrita of the Tibetans, and there being a secret mushroom cult at the center of this. So I was curious, what do you think this looked like in practice back in these days as the tantras are rising? How were people taking these mushrooms? What kind of setting was being used for these religious breakthroughs?
Well, I've thought about this, and in the original Indian context, it seems that these groups of people got together like after the initiation. Basically, an initiation included not just the taking of Amrita, but being introduced to the nature of mind and being taught a visualization and a mantra. So it would be a visualization of yourself as a particular deity and reciting the mantra of that deity. Now, every month after that, you are entitled to attend a gathering of initiates who again refresh their memory with another dose of Amrita and do the visualization and mantra recitation while under the influence. Now, these were called Ghana Chakra, or it's if I translate it literally, it means wheel assembly, which sounds like something you'd find in an auto repair manual, but it was a circle of initiates, if you like. That was what was meant by wheel or chakra. So Ghana, it also means a troop of soldiers. So there's lots of implications and allusions in the names of these. So these people would meet typically at some deserted or inauspicious place. They would, for instance, meet in charnel grounds, in places where bodies were burned, where dead people were taken to be burned on funeral pyres. Now, some of the tantras have a list of typically 8 of these. Some you see them in mandalas too. The 8 Mahasmashana, the 8 great cemetery grounds. I find it rather interesting that what distinguishes a Mahasmashana, a great cemetery ground, is that you never need to make fire. You can always take the fire for your funeral pyre from another one that's smoldering somewhere else. And some of these Mahasmashanas are actual, like real places that still exist. And so we know then that some of them have had a continuous fire going for about 4,000 years. So that's where they would meet typically in the Indian context. And the Tantras actually describe some of the goings on. Like in the Vajra Tantra, it says, if there be songs, let them be good Vajra songs. If there be dances, let them be good Vajra dances. So these people were letting their hair down a bit in the Ghana chakras. But what they meant by Vajra songs and Vajra dances, and Vajra is a prefix, often used as a prefix to indicate Buddhist, or more typically Vajrayana Buddhist. And so it was to be expected that the songs were rather like the symbolic songs that the Bauls of Bengal still sing to this day. I mean, that's Baul, by the way. The wandering musicians and singers of Bengal sing mystical songs in which they mix up Buddhism and Sufism and a bunch of other mystic things. And in a tradition which has been going on since this tantric milieu of the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. So that was how it was practiced in India. In Tibet, such things are still known, called tsokwa in Tibetan, and we have accounts, rather sketchy and symbolic accounts for the most part, of these Ghana chakras in Tibet. There is one from the 14th century recorded by the great philosopher Longchen, philosopher and yogin, I should say. And by the way, his books are amazing. They are to be read just like 1 or 2 lines at a time, because you can't take in more than that. You'll be like spaced out by just 2 lines. Anyway, I'm a great fan of Longchen. He described this Ghana chakra, which took place in the 14th century, and all I can say is they must have been like surprised by the strength of the Amrita. There were monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen there, and various members of the one might call it a congregation started channeling gods and goddesses and making pronouncements and such. It was. It seems to have been a rather wild affair. Um, there aren't too many of these. It is really rather eye-opening when you see these accounts. So I have other experiences of Amrita, of anecdotal accounts of modern, still fully potent Amrita, but I'm not sure that I can share them. I haven't got clearance from all the people involved, so there's it's still used. There are. Here's something I can tell you. Many people are familiar with the name of Chodam Trungpa Rinpoche. He was one of the first Tibetan teachers in the US. I knew him in Britain, in England and Scotland before he came to the US. And I can remember him in, I think, 1966, telling rather bourgeois, middle-aged ladies of the Buddhist Society, the Buddhist Society of the UK, 58 Eccleston Square. I can remember him telling some of these rather well-off matrons that they should take LSD. Parallel to this, I knew hippies who were living in the same commune as him in West London, in the Notting Hill area, and that he was telling some people, "Oh, you shouldn't take any more LSD; it's not good for you." And then telling them, like when he tripped with them, that they weren't treating it seriously enough. And then also that he had experience of more potent things in Tibet, and gave them the name Dutsi Rilbu, which means Amrita pills. So even quite recently, we have great teachers like Dzongsa Chensi Rinpoche, who in a talk, a public talk in Mexico, which you can find on YouTube, he actually mentions psychoactive plants and says, "Oh, we," meaning the Vajrayana, "have ways of using these things. And if you don't believe me, I can give you page numbers." So, and then about an hour into the talk, he says, he mentions peyote, and says, "I was given a little peyote juice before I came on, but it doesn't seem to be working yet." So it was very, very secret. They say in Tibet that there are 7 levels of secrecy in the Vajrayana. So even if you get the initiation, you're not getting all of it, most likely.
Yeah, well, that leads to something I was going to ask, because you spend so much time thinking about the different plants that this could be and offering up possibilities I'd never heard of, like an ayahuasca type brew that might exist in India that takes DMT and a MAO inhibitor. And
yes, and that, by the way, that I could just little footnote here. That is a late tantric concoction called Panchamrita, which means the 5-fold Amrita. So it has 5 components. And if you look up the word punch in the Oxford English Dictionary, you'll see that this is where it comes from. It was originally Panchamrita. And so, like, if you have really old-fashioned punch, it comes ready spiked. Anyway, carry on. What were you asking? I've forgotten now.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect part of it, is that, that it became punch, which is 5, different drinks mixed together. And so there's all these different plants that were getting used or might have been getting used. And I was wondering, it feels a little bit like almost a festival circuit today, where it was they've taken the psychoactives that would work. And so the 5th century is when all of this arose together and people started secretly experimenting using whatever they had, especially in a place like Tibet that doesn't have many psychoactive plants around.
Right, which might explain some of the more surprised reactions from people when they get hold of the real thing. You know, there is that episode in the biography of Milarepa where Dadmema, Marpa's wife, comes to him in retreat and says, "Oh, Marpa says you're to come out of retreat," and he says, "Oh, I know these tricks. He's tested me before like this. I'm not falling for it," which, by the way, is absolutely believable. Anyway, I won't go into details, but anyway, she persuades him like on 3 goes, like finally persuades him he's got to come and get this initiation into Chakrasamvar, I think it is, because Marpa has just got Amrita from India, and there's like an oral tradition about the history of Milarepa, which tells you things that are not in the book. And but part of this oral tradition is that when offered the Amrita, he didn't realize that you're supposed to take like a teaspoon of it into the palm of your hand. He took her whole skull cup and drained it. He drank like the whole of the Amrita for the ceremony. He'd never done it before, so he didn't know the drill. Anyway, he was apparently...
We all know that guy.
Yeah. And he was given, his behavior is not described, but eventually it says the Dakinis, the female goddesses, which are all also equivalent to plants and their effects, which is something I discovered between the first and second editions of the book. So the Dakinis gave him the name Kipa Dorje, which means laughing Vajra. And, you know, many people who experience psychedelics for the first time or their first really strong dose will laugh their heads off. And so I don't, this is just a little, suggestion and not like offered as a definitive open and shut case. This is just something that might explain a little sidelight of history there. So there's also these stories of Pema Lingpa in Bhutan, who has visions after eating a mushroom. He makes mushroom and wheat flour curry, and he shares it with an old guy who is possibly Padmasambhava, but like 900 years old. So I've got the bones of that story in the book too. So if you care to read it, it's in there. Yes, it seems that some lamas are recognizing, Tibetan lamas, I mean, are recognizing that while they may have been able to keep psychedelics to themselves, and I don't mean like not letting it out, but just keeping it as a secret that you've got to jump through hurdles to get to. It's not that nobody is allowed. It's just that there are a lot of things you've got to do first before you're allowed into the club, and like the aforesaid tests. So they realized that in the West, these things are pretty well known and are usually used for recreation. And now is about the time to say that there are ways of using this, which are not recreational and which may bring about profound changes in your own personality, perception of the world, etc.
Yes.
So I think this chosen a few lamas who are coming forward and saying that the potential exists within Vajrayana Buddhism. I am writing a book, in fact, two complementary books. One is Psychedelics for Buddhists. The other one is Buddhism for Psychonauts. I hope to see it bound as one, like both upside down. So depending on which way you stand it up, it's one or the other.
That's great, because actually the next thing I wanted to ask was about your Buddhist approach to psychedelics, because it was one of my favorite parts of your book, which was a very enjoyable book. But the end, when you talked about your Buddhist approach, it was very moving. I was wondering if you could share some of that.
I mean, it was a long time ago that I had this, if you like, revelation that was on LSD in England. I was sat quietly listening to Bach on the hi-fi in my friend's house in a rural part of England, and I became aware of it was like I could see into a space with more than 3 dimensions, and I could see a vast, like infinite array of what could be described as crystal balls, all absolutely flawless, perfectly spherical and perfectly clear and pellucid. These crystal balls each refracted the entire array in such a way that by looking at just one of them, you could see all of them. In fact, it dawned on me that they were actually just the refraction of the rest of the array and had no individual existence of themselves. And so this was this a fundamental voidness of the universe. And I at the time I could also see that they were at the same time wave packets of energy, which were modulated by all the other wave packets of energy. So at the time, I'd only just met my teacher. Oh, I wasn't even formally his student at this point. But I was reading a lot about Buddhism. And I read this one account from the Avatamsaka Sutra. In fact, it was actually a Chinese. There's a school in Buddhism in China, in medieval China, called Huayang, and the founder of this school wrote a synopsis of the philosophy of the school, and he mentioned something called the net of Indra, and basically he described exactly what I'd seen. He described my vision. He didn't get the wave packet being modulated by the other wave packets, but I just blame the deficiencies of classical Chinese. So this in itself blew me away. But then he goes on to say, as is described in detail in the Avatamsaka Sutra. So then I had to go and find that and find that, people have been having this same experience for, maybe thousands of years. So I came to the realization that either the psychedelics had allowed me a sneaky back door into this experience that did not require decades of dedication and practice, or these guys were taking psychedelics too. Now, either way, I thought that both meditation and the psychedelics should be engaged in and pursued for their own benefits and for their combined benefits. So that's what I try to do whenever taking psychedelics, is to I've never been able to reproduce that precise vision, though. That no matter how often I tried, or you can't do it too often. Of course, it'll stop working if you it takes psychedelics too often. But I've had plenty of opportunities over the past 50 odd years. So it occurred to me that if either of these two approaches were true, that psychedelics give you access to this space, or these ancients, the ancient sages, were also using psychedelics. Either way, I thought that was a green light for me to continue. My own teacher never ever criticized this, although he did say once, "I think I know why you take drugs. It's because you're very clever." I didn't ask him to explain, because I know he never does explain anything like that. I think he just meant that I'd worked it out. I didn't need to be taught this. I had worked it out for myself. So, yes, hence the what I included in the conclusion to the book, and just gave a summary of pretty much like I've given here, I think, and and how I think that psychedelics could be used to good effect in Buddhist practice. It's something that was discovered a long time ago by the Vajrayana movement, but they did attempt to keep it under wraps and keep it, tightly controlled. They do say that if you embark on the Vajrayana, if you do take the initiations and such seriously, it's like riding a tiger. In fact, there is a popular version of the person who introduced Vajrayana to Tibet, Padmasambhava, also called Guru Rinpoche, who is actually perched on the back of a tiger. And if he ever steps off that tiger, the tiger will eat him. And she's supposed to be a hungry, pregnant tigress. So, you just can't get down. So, that's, and I think that's basically a good analogy for either dedicated Vajrayana practices or dedicated psychedelic practices. I mean, there's a serious, not straight face serious, but I just mean a non-ludibund, a non-recreational core to psychedelics. People talk about recreational use, and I just know that there's no such thing as a purely recreational dose. Even you can be ambushed by ontological revelations on the dance floor or whatever. It can sneak up on you. The first time I ever took MDMA was with a lady friend, and it was still legal at the time, and we went for a walk in rather beautiful countryside. And although I found the countryside quite amazing and enchanting, I was blown away by the fact that my companion started spouting Mahayana philosophy. Not only did she, spell it all out. She'd never ever read a book of Buddhism or had read anything about Buddhism, but she was even inventing terms like unborn. She said it's like there is an unborn substrate to everything of course this is the Sanskrit term abhava, which is used in exactly the same context as she was using it. I just shut up and listened. It's not a very common phenomenon, if any of my friends will tell you. So even a recreational dose, what's intended to be recreational, can actually smack you upside the head with ontological realities.
And I like how you said it can be the sneaky way to get to that kind of state, because I always feel like I would have been a very materialistic scientist for my whole life, just stay in the lab if it wasn't for a couple of walks on magic mushrooms. And so you never, it wasn't what I expected. And so I was wondering, you had your early days before you were really practicing Buddhism. So once you started seriously researching and writing this book and seeing how widespread the clues were to this, and I'll end on this question. Did the research of this book and talking to people that you talked to about it, did it affect your own entheogenic practice and how you've been approaching psychedelics and your Buddhism?
I don't think it has, actually. It's just that, and I would hasten to add that the stuff that I use in the book for its probative value, if you like, I have had initiations that to me seem to be telling me how to identify the mushroom. There's certain weird acts that we've got to act out one at a time in some initiations. That, like, for instance, I would love to meet someone else who has the empowerment of Chakrasamvara according to the tradition of Luipa. Now, there is something in there that I want to talk to someone about. I can't do this over a podcast. You don't have the requisite empowerments. But although it hasn't changed my use of the psychedelics, the use of the psychedelics and the familiarity with them has made me wonder about certain things in the tradition. So if anyone would like to explore such things, as I mentioned, I happen to live on a very remote farm. It's incredibly beautiful around here, not at the moment, but it is beautiful from looking out the window, all that snow. But in spring, it's just a mass of wildflowers and idyllic temperatures and such. So I would welcome anyone who would like to check out. There's a Facebook page called Duncan Creek Farm Retreats. I think that's what I called it. So if anyone would like to come visit in spring, I expect you to have had your COVID vaccinations and stuff by then. I have this 20-acre farm in the middle of nowhere where we can discuss such matters at great length. So you are welcome here too, Lex, if you have the opportunity.
That would sound great. That would sound really great. I'd love to keep hearing about this, because just to end, the book is excellent. For anyone who's been interested in this, it's not only is it well researched with hundreds of footnotes, but it also has these cheeky little humor hidden around in various corners that is very well done. So I just want to say thank you for taking the time to talk with us today, and thank you for putting together this great work. That's a great addition to the canon on psychedelic literature. So thank you so much, Mike.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And as I say, I'll talk to anyone at the moment. So yes, please feel free to invite me again if you ever want to. And as I say, if anyone wants to come up and hang out in the spring or fall, summer gets a bit hot, but spring and fall is nice. You just check out that Facebook page. Okay. And thanks a lot for letting me ramble on my favorite subject.
That sounds great. It was beautiful, and we'll put those links in the episode notes for everybody so they can find them.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks again, and until next time.
Until then.
Thanks for tuning in. To listen to other episodes, check out pluscbdoil.com
Listen on all the podcast platforms or see us on YouTube. Subscribe to the CV Sciences YouTube channel to see each new episode. And if you'd like to buy any of our fine products, use the coupon code LEXFILES for 25% off. If you have any questions, compliments, or suggestions, feel free to write me at research@cvsciences.com, and please follow the podcast on Twitter @The Lex Files Show, where I try to keep it fun. If you enjoyed this program, please give us a like on your favorite platform or share a link to your social media. It means a lot to us. The Lex Files is produced by Matt Payne. The YouTube videos are by Brendan Cleek. Thank you to Tina Molnar and Jasmine Morris for the visuals, and the music is by Jake Bradford Sharp. Our sponsor is CV Sciences, makers of America's favorite CBD oil. And I'm Lex Pelger, signing off.